This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, folks, and welcome. I'm Rick Singleton, Provost here at Queen's College, and delighted today to welcome you to the second in our three-part series on digital ministries. The session is going to focus on a lot of the practical matters. I want to say a special thank you to the presenters that I've rounded up for today's topic, entitled A Primer on Pastoral and Technical Tools and Skills, How to be Effective and Efficient in Digital Ministries. We had a session last week on ecclesiology matters, and next week is on personal and professional wellness. I want to say at the start of it, just to mention to you that if you have any particular thoughts or questions or issues that you want to make sure are included in the session next week, then send it along to me, and I'll bring it to the panel. We have for the session tomorrow or next week, Kurt Hillier, who's a registered psychologist and a great presenter on these topics. So we'll meet next week. And today for the session, I want to say a thank you to the presenters, Bishop John Watton, Reverend Eli Evans, Reverend Tanya White, Canon Greg Mercer. I'll facilitate the session, which basically means I'll nudge along the slides and then guide you to the discussion and wrap it up at the end. But thank you to the panelists who've participated in planning and did a lot of work in preparing materials that will be unfolded to you as we move along. The game plan with the session is we're going to just move on through. For the first little bit, I've asked Reverend Tanya White to give us some thoughts and ideas, as we describe it here, experiences online from the front line, what her experience has been with this. Bishop John will then bring us into a deeper context of it. Then Reverend Eli will take us to some tools and skills, and Reverend Greg Mercer will bring us through further stuff on effective and efficient digital ministries. And Greg will also bring us to a reflection at the end. Bishop John will start his session with a reflection period, and that's how we'll do our opening prayer. So to get us moving, I'm going to pass it right now to, or in a moment, to Tanya. But first of all, I'll ask all who are attending, if you would please turn off your microphone and your camera, except for those who are presenting at a particular moment, such as Tanya will be now, and then we'll move it on that way. There will be a time later on in the session for discussion, questions, comments, observations, sharings, and so we'll come to that after each of the panelists have presented. So thank you, and we'll move it on. Right to you, Tanya.
Okay, well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks to Dr. Singleton for the opportunity to participate in this continuing education series this morning. Queens, I would imagine for many of us, find ourselves in a time that Queens was our foundation. So it enabled us to start our ministry here in this province and beyond. And so to participate this morning in this session is an honor for me. It's a chance to perhaps bring back some knowledge and experience since leaving the college for me 15 years ago. So to tell others, with the aid of all our presenters here this morning, how we are becoming effective and efficient in digital ministry, and that we all need it to start somewhere. All of our lives were changed on the middle of March when we were told by our government officials that church buildings were now to be closed. And this announcement left many of us to ponder, what am I going to be able to do? We are in the midst of Lenten season, and we had to reach those who normally came to our church buildings. And I know that we often give up things for Lent, but giving up worship for Lent was kind of an extreme, I thought. So I guess most of us were looking for a short-term response to what we never imagined was going to last as long as what it did. Most thought we would probably be back by Easter, and definitely we would be in our church buildings by Pentecost. So I got on my computer and I watched what other people were doing, and I hoped that it would be for the short term. There was GoToMeeting, there was YouTube, there was Facebook Live, there was Zoom, and so many other programs that we could use. Some of it looked simple enough, and for the first week, I did as much reading on digital ministry as time would allow. With a lump in my throat, I posted to my personal Facebook page that I would be live on Sunday morning. And all I could think of was, goodness, Tanya, you're no televangelist, but you go, girl. You were never one to back down, and if Jonah could survive the whale and Daniel could survive the lion's den, surely, goodness, you could survive going live for 45 minutes. I guess in my mind it was, don't worry about the technology right now. Yes, it has to work and be decent, but most people will understand it's not perfect. They have known and journeyed with you for 9 years, so focus on building connections between people. Everyone can still greet everyone else at the beginning in the comments, and they can comment throughout. Focus on making sure that people can respond to worship. They'll still hear the word of God, a response to that word, pray for the world, the country, the province, and the needs therein. We would have a virtually located assembly at the people of God dwelling in community with the task of building the kingdom. Keep telling myself that online church is church, the same way that house churches in small communities in years past were church as well. After going through the process and watching others do the same, we realized that many things needed to be ironed out. We needed to seek out new ideas, rethink existing approaches, and sometimes we had to visit forgotten ideas. Even going back to rely more on the telephone. It was different not being able to visit with a person personally or go into their personal home, but the telephone allowed you to phone more people than ever before. And guess what? Everyone was home because they were in their own bubbles and they weren't to burst anyone else's. It was like back in my childhood when you were Jehovah's Witness and you knocked on doors and everybody hid. That wasn't the case now. Everyone was home. They were in their own bubbles. Some of my own experiences that I have observed from others is that sometimes when you log in that the broadcast, because of the internet speed, that the voice you hear is saying one thing, but the words that are coming out of the person's mouth is a little different. So you might be saying, and also with you, but the minister is saying, the Lord be with you. In one case, I saw one clergy preaching and one lady having her cigarette. Other times you can hear others during the morning readings. The camera looks fine to you, but to everybody else, you're upside down. Also, when I did my first service, the sign behind my head that said, "Good morning," was now backwards as the camera switches everything, so all the signs after had to be made in a mirror. I needed all the letters to be backwards and some of them to be upside down. You get the picture. And then once I got the technology kind of down pat, it's how should I look online? As one person said last week, he treats the service the same as if he was getting up and going to the church building. Should I wear my collar or no collar? Should the table behind me have the same colored cloths as the altar would have if we were in the actual church building? So many questions. Should the broadcast be in the church building or in the priest's home? Should you put it online live, or should you pre-record and then go back and fix any mistakes? In it all, we have a lot to learn from others, but we need to sustain the communities that we have been presently called to shepherd. Let me pass it over to the others who probably can answer some of these questions that we're all on here this morning and have. It's all important to have the tools because people are now binge watching. 3 months ago, it was Netflix and the new seasons that were on there and sitting down to binge watch it. But now I hear of people who are watching worship service sometimes as high as 4 and 5 a day. They're looking at their present rector and all the rectors that they've had for the last 50 years. So we need the tools in order to provide it for them. Pass it over to the men, as I'm the only woman here today to present.
Everything's muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, Tanya. I'm sorry about all the noise there a few minutes ago. I was going from my iPad to my phone, talking about technology, because I just got 4 phone calls in a row. I was about to dump my iPhone in an aquarium. Anyway, Rick, you want to put up the first slide there? The slides that I have will run through fairly quickly, and like Tanya, I want to say thank you to Queens for giving me more work to do. It's a joy to be here, of course, and I'm in the middle of a whole bunch of different things that really tie into some of the stuff I had to say today. For example, I just got off the phone earlier, and we're dealing with a huge time difference between here and different parts of the country. One of the things that I have to do is the link bishop for ACPO. That's most of us have been to ACPO. Is try to network across the country and help each province decide what to do in relation to the ACPO conference that normally would be held around this time. And so I sent out questions to people, and the basic answer that I got back from certain groups of people, not all, is I don't understand your question. For me, I made a note of this along the lines of reference points. And I would ask you, if you're thinking about COVID-19, the effect that it's had on you and your ministries and your studies or whatever, it's probably a good idea to stop and say, what particular things have challenged my reference points? And to do that, I turn to 1 Corinthians. So Rick, you might want to start just sort of following along with the slides there. Now, I know that some people may believe that 1 Corinthians was written specifically for the COVID pandemic. Some of us are also aware of the fact that it was written for a church that was going through all kinds of issues. A whole lot of people who didn't understand the reference point of the cross, of salvation, of the work of Jesus, and they were doing all kinds of things. Now, I'd love to be able to spend an hour doing a Bible study with you on 1 Corinthians, but I don't have time, obviously. But what I want to say about 1 Corinthians is that there's a core group of teachings there that might prove beneficial to you. They certainly have to me in my work as a bishop, trying to encourage our clergy and to for us to reestablish ourselves and remember who we are and where we are. While 1 Corinthians was not written for us today, exactly, specifically for us, it has an incredible body of orthodox wisdom that I just want to briefly run through with you. So I'm not going to preach, but I want to try and make a few connections that really we might all be sharing as part of the overall impact that this pandemic has had on us, certainly in relation to technology. So my presentation is not going to be about specific tips or whatever. We have a couple of really good presenters here today for that. So when I started engaging the fallout of clergy in particular finding themselves lost, I began to draw heavily on Paul's writings to the Corinthian church. He was writing to deal with issues that were threatening to obliterate the foundational message of Jesus. And that's one thing we do have in common, I think, with the Corinthian church. They were in a confused, angry mess. So what are the essential teachings? I remind you that Paul was writing to the Corinthians and reminding them that the resurrection of Christians was a future event. And so Paul said, the way we live now is important, and the way we understand Jesus is essential. So there's a core group of teachings in Corinthians that I'm just going to run through them with you and pray that they feed your souls today. Paul says that Christians must lead humble and moral lives. Christians must consistently work for harmony and set a good example for those who are outside the community. That's been one of my concerns with technology, is that we do not, we understand it, we work with it, we're proficient at it, but we don't use it for the same reasons. So Paul says, grow up. The Greek word teleos means just that. You're becoming mature. So there you go, Rick. You're going to have us all dizzy here in a minute. But Paul teaches, in essence, that the mark of a mature Christian is this: there's no party spirit. And when I say that, I share that scripture with you. I want you to think about the fact that some of you who are using technology may be challenged by comparisons. One of the things that I discovered is that the people who are online really want to do a good job, and a lot of us are asking, was that good? Was the sound good? Was the message good? Did I get my point across? And other people are saying, well, they did it really well, and that video wasn't all that good, you know. And so I think some of us who are just getting into technology feel somewhat vulnerable by comparison. So I remind everyone, those who are good at it and those who are challenged by it, that Paul teaches that there is no party spirit in the church. And any human knowledge, any spiritual power or so-called heavenly endowed wisdom or revelation has to humble itself before grace and love. So if someone's getting more hits than you are, be happy for them. We're all part of the same team. We're all part of the same family, and we can learn from each other. We're not in a competition, and we can be generous to each other. That's very, very quick. So let's keep going. And let me ask you, those of you who are engaging these new and uncertain demands of ministry, how you doing with that? One of the reasons why in our diocese we've delayed opening of our churches until the 6th of September is I want to make sure our clergy are okay. I want to make sure that they have actually intentionally spent time considering their own wellness and what they might need in relation to training and preparing for the future. And a word of encouragement comes to us from Corinthians. Christians identify with the suffering Lord, and they will suffer and sacrifice for him and for the sake of others. In other words, we should be building each other up in terms of confidence, in terms of support, and in terms of presence, of being there for each other. And so this has to be part of our witness. And that's a tough one because we're going through it like everybody else. But I would encourage you to remember, and I'm sure you both, you know both of these passages off by heart, right? Philippians 4:13 and 4:19. A summary of that: you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, and God will supply everything that we need to do the work of our ministry. Off we go. Is there an uncertainty because of new demands that you don't really understand? I get a lot of phone calls from people who are asking all kinds of questions about what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. There's an uncertainty in relation to leadership in parishes. We've had some lay people who have been incredibly supportive, and we've had some lay people who have felt that clergy should be laid off. And that's just two examples of this dynamic that's taking place all around us. And I can't identify for everyone in this seminar what the uncertainty of new demands that you're facing. But let me ask that basic question. Is there an uncertainty because of new demands that you really don't understand? In our diocese, there's kind of a mantra. We're saying that, we're getting ready for questions that we don't know what they're going to be, and we don't know when they're going to be asked, and we don't know who's going to ask them. But a core teaching of 1 Corinthians is that mature Christians have hope in the face of a life that's been disassembled by hardship, even death. And that may sound ominous, but let's think about something. There are certain aspects of our church life, of our corporate life, that are probably coming to an end now. And we can go back to that basic understanding that because we believe God has conquered death, if death is conquered, all things are possible. Off we go, right? And what about your safety net? We have these defined ministries, and I know I'm not talking to all clergy here, and I'm sure laity can relate to this as well. Because lay people have safety nets too, where there's a certain defined role for ministry, the rector of a parish, for a parish council member, for a parish secretary, for a treasurer, for musicians, for licensed lay ministers. And we've all had a safety net of defined ministry. Some people feel that's disintegrating. I think a lot of people are throwing everything they have at videos online. And as Tanya said, people are binge watching, but I keep a close track on the numbers. YouTube in particular gives you an idea of if someone watches your video, how long they actually stay online. Facebook doesn't do that. Someone might click on your link and move on, and it turns up as a view. So the truth of the matter is minutes are declining online as well, and the amount of time people are spending watching our videos is much, much shorter than it used to be. So what's going on in the church? I'm discovering nationally. I sent out an email to the House of Bishops and to those who are involved with ACPO as a prime example, and I'm being bombarded by different perspectives and different opinions. One of the problems we were having all along was trying to draw people together in unity. With COVID-19, and certainly with the way we're using technology, it seems that in some ways we're being driven further apart. So here's a core value for you. Mature Christians will patiently strive for unity in the body of Christ. Ecclesia is one of the highest values. In other words, we must not lose sight of the fact that ecclesia, some people pronounce it ecclesia, but ecclesia is the joining together of people with common minds and common hearts. On we go, Rick. I'm talking fast. I'm sorry, but I want to get to this material. I don't want to take up any more time than I'm allotted. So what foundation do we have to build on? Mature Christians love. Simple as that. Engage everything that you can with as much love as you can. Our strongest witness is how the love of God is reflected in how we love others. And I believe with all my heart that it's time for an outpouring of an incredible, generous love wherever we can and whenever we can. People are ultra sensitive right now. Um, I went in the Canadian Tire, well, a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I were walking across the parking lot, and the door was open in the porch of Canadian Tire, and a staff member saw us coming and started yelling at us because there was only one person allowed in the store. And boy, she was mean. You know, and I've thought about that because I got angry and I left. You know, I just left. But you know, I'm trying to understand what it is that's setting people off today, what the triggers are, and I'm more and more convinced that it's time for an outpouring of incredibly generous love. We need the Holy Spirit to lead us through this. All right, Rick, next slide. Now I'm going to have a prayer now. Father, we bless you. We bless the opportunity to have conversations, even those such as these. As we all speak here today, and as we all listen, as we all share, Lord, we ask your blessing. We ask for the anointing of your Spirit and ask you to guide, direct, and connect our thoughts. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. It's so strange not hearing an amen at the end of a prayer. It gives you the sense that you have no idea how you're doing, you know? Anyway, technology, the practice of ministry and technology. I remind everyone that technology is really a practical word. And of course, we have to go to the New Testament because we're all biblical scholars here. And techne just means art, skill, cunning of hand. And it means that there's a summary and a totality of the techniques that you have developed to do something and the skill set that you have to do them. Now, 1,000 years ago, technology meant that you could go in the backyard and you could manufacture something like soap, or you could process food. You knew how to build a home for your family. We all know today that post-scientific revolution, technology is not driven as much by human need as by a human desire to make money. For example, there was a time when medical science was being advanced by religious leaders primarily, who explored, who had acts of faith, and they discovered new ways of treating people. And that quickly turned into a whole new revolution when people realized that to have the ability to provide and to heal people meant that you also had power over people. And that's been part of the shift in our culture. Amazon, for example, during the pandemic, increased their profits by I think 35 billion. So think about that. So what I'm saying is that technology, that ethos that we're talking about, is not a simple, ordinary video that we put online. You are actually participating in a larger community where everything is measured online. Facebook is not there to help you spread the gospel. Facebook is there to gather algorithms so they can sell stuff. You should be aware of that always. So in the Bible, though, technology refers to the fact that we have tools that we can use. And so I try to remind people, and I remind myself, because I'm a person who loves technology. If I'm sitting in my studio now, I'm surrounded by amplifiers and guitars and recording equipment and microphones. But I have to always remind myself that technology is a tool. It is not the answer or the solution, and technology is certainly not the ministry. So, Rick, you might want to move on to the next couple of slides there. I've already covered that one. Technology is not the answer or the solution, and it is certainly not the ministry. So the next step that I would want to share with you is to ask yourself a few questions and just sort of as a reflection, what are the societal correlations between technology and mission? In other words, what do people think we're doing when we're online? Is what we're doing with a video what those people think we're doing with a video? And what is the positive correlations between technology and mission from your perspective as a layperson or a minister or someone who's involved with putting videos online? What's good about that? And sometimes it's good to pull back and think, what am I doing here? One of the things, for example, that's happening is that the videos from churches where people are playing guitars and singing and doing a whole bunch of excuse the word, inspirationally entertaining things, the numbers are quite high. Sermons, people enjoy meditations, but they don't want to listen to someone on the internet for 25 minutes. I can guarantee you that. So, it's good to think about these things and the positive correlations between technology and mission and the negative correlations between technology and mission. And think about that in your life and ministry. Some people are really, really, really being frustrated by using videos. And to be honest, in our diocese, I say to people, look, if you're good at it, fantastic, go for it. And if you're not good at it, don't go beating yourself up over it. And in all cases, my advice to our clergy and my directive to the clergy is that you need to get your parish list and start phoning people. They need to hear your voice, and you need to hear the voice of real people. And to the extent that you're doing that, it's been incredibly, incredibly rewarding. Some parishes have discovered that pretty much everyone has a cell phone, so their parish list has become a challenge. So we have people who are actually building new parish lists, and it's been a fantastic experience for them. So this is what I've discovered in our diocese. All of our clergy began to see the value in an online presence. That means the ones who knew a lot about it and the ones who didn't know anything about it, and some of the ones who didn't care to learn. So some of them have moved fairly easily into regular patterns of production and worship. Some of them have really had a hard time with that. But what I've discovered is that those who were good at technology or thought they were have made some really, really new discoveries about just how hard it really is, because some people tend to overthink everything when it comes to technology. And some of our clergy have gone out and spent all kinds of money on new equipment and discovered that it really didn't improve things. So there's a learning curve for all of us, and it's important to be aware of that. It can be really, really, really frustrating to produce consistently high quality videos. All right, great. So others struggle with major shifts in their own life, thinking about technology, and some of them are struggling with the simple internet access. Like in some of our rural areas, people have had to give up doing live videos, and some of our areas where people have recorded videos, they've had to spend 5, 6, and 7 hours trying to upload their videos as well. So people are struggling with that. They're struggling with technical difficulties with software, creating new accounts, using different meeting platforms. As I said, huge upload times, how to get started and how to fix things when stuff goes wrong. And some feel lost and ineffective. And there are some people who sense a real gap. And that's why I stress, don't go comparing yourself to anyone, whether you're good at it or not, because it leads to some pretty mixed feelings. Keep going, Rick. And the mixed feelings, my friends, is not just about technology. It's about facing our deeply rooted concerns about society, about commerce, about self-directed spirituality that we're surrounded by, and so on. For some of us, being immersed in technology has been like a cold bath. It's a shocking experience. And for others, we've been in this water so long that we haven't noticed the change in the temperature. So we can ask ourselves, we must ask ourselves, next one, Rick, where is the Spirit leading us in all this? Keep going, Rick. And I would say to you that we've already been in a very deep conversation about sustainability in the church and mission. I am really glad that people are learning new methods of technology. But I want people to remember always that there is no substitute for relationships, for making connections, for the phone call, for the doorstop visit. There is no substitute for reaching out to actually be with people, however you can. So don't forget that when you post on YouTube and you upload to Facebook or wherever you put your video, remember that not everybody in the world is going to see it. And there are hurting, lonely people out there who still need an alternate way to hear and receive love. So what I'm saying to you is that we, as a church, we have to answer that question. That's a question for all of us. For you, I would say this: remember to use the gifts you have, and don't let your perceptions of the bigger picture, as important as it is, steal your connection and your vocation to your local ministry. It's time for us as a church to strive for a diocesan, parish, congregational, and educational unity. So I'm really thankful that Queens is doing these things, because we really need it now. I'm almost done here. Spend time reviewing what you're trying to do in your life and in your ministry. Look at the things that are life-giving to your ministry and the things that steal life away from you. Try to remember that the peace of God that passes all understanding is a promise of God to you, and it lies on the path that God has chosen for you. I always use that as a barometer in my life. When I feel that the peace is gone, I need to spend time in prayer. I need to detach, and I need to ask God to help me recover that peace. It's a great way of knowing how you're doing spiritually, and it also, of course, has a lot to do with your physical well-being as well. So a few practical things. Be aware. What are your reference points? Last slide, right? Be aware. What are your reference points? Remember, my friends, this is a time of year when we are already worn down. Use your gifts. Remember the gifts that you have. Do not think that the gifts you have are no longer valuable. They are. I know it's a challenge for some of us who love to visit, who love to do things one-on-one, but continue to use your gifts. Find people who are able to help you, especially with technology. And in a few moments, we have a couple of great presenters who are going to do that for you. Spend time looking at the local needs of your community. I think in Cresceo, we call it the study of your environment. What are the needs of your community? Don't get caught up in technology to the point where you're trying to answer questions that none of your people are asking. I'll say this once more. Telephone ministry is very important. Don't feel guilty if you're uncomfortable with it. Do the best you can. If you make one phone call a day and that person needs to talk for half an hour or an hour, awesome. That's the way it should be. Do what you do well. That means your sound and your video. Yes, invest time in learning, but also learn your limitations. And that way you can do the best that you can with what you have. Find people to give you simple and practical advice. They are out there. And we have a couple here who are now going to take over and help you with that. Rick, I hope I didn't go over too long.
Well, it was well worth it, Bishop John. Thank you for the thought and time and the effort to be with us to prepare for it and present today. I, and that's technical detail. I thanked Tanya before you started and then discovered my mic wasn't on. So there you go. But Tanya, thank you as well for situating it in a very practical front line as a pastor in a congregation. Bishop John taking us into a kind of a theological rootedness to it. And now I'm going to pass it to Reverend Eli Evans, who has a history and experience. I first met him as a student here at Queen's College when we were making the big leap from the old time slide projectors, or not slide, slide projectors and overhead projectors to using PowerPoint. And Eli was my go-to person. There are people out there, and he's still there, and a great resource to the church now. Eli, I'll ask you to turn on your camera, your microphone, and take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for the privilege of being here today. Tanya pointed out at the very beginning, we have been cast off into a technological ocean. And so the analogy that I like to use is we were all just thrown out there. And so some of us are just trying to tread water. Others have a boat, and others have always had one. And so somewhere in the midst of that, everyone is in this scenario that really no one saw coming. But we are all trying to find a way to get our footing in this new reality. And so we can move to the first slide there, Rick. And so some points to ponder as I go through this. We're learning a skill set while using that same skill set. And so what I mean is we're learning to swim while we've been thrown in the water, or we're learning to use a boat while we're, in the ocean. The analogy I used to use is we're learning to drive, but you got to drive to the driving school. And somewhere in the midst of all of these things, there are skills that we need to pick up seemingly to engage our congregations digitally. And one of the things I want to point out before I get into what our options is fatigue will come from using the tools. Let alone from doing the work that the tools are used for. And we shouldn't confuse those two things. As has been pointed out already, technology and what we're able to do with it is a set of tools, but fatigue can come from using the tools. I'm a carpenter by trade. That's what I was done in my formation years. That's what I did. And in that process, using some tools physically wears you out. Well, in using technology tools, there are indeed some wear and tear that comes along with that as well. And so we must be cognizant and vigilant about that. Because when we are indeed fatigued, it complicates our ability to focus on the task at hand. And so what that does is it puts in jeopardy our ability to engage in what we're here for. As was pointed out last week, Jesus traveled, Paul congregated. Traditionally, as we know, we built buildings. Each of those things were how we engaged our people because the focus was to tell the story. The focus was to proclaim the good news of God and Jesus Christ. And so different methodologies have existed through different times. And right now you find yourself that technology seemingly must be one of those at least. And so be careful to know and to note that it can act as an uncounted drain on your energy. And so, the interesting part is if I use, I'm in my home right now, but I also have an office that's 2 doors away. And so I can walk up the road and go to the office and do a meeting just as well as I can do it here. And the walk in between takes a little over a minute, not very long, but it's just long enough to recognize that you're no longer on the screen. We need that time to see that you've left the technology behind, but for a minute. A warning about comparisons. They're not always helpful. Seeing what others do is great for ideas. That's how we learn. That's how we strive. That's how we set ourselves for what it is we're going to do. But it's not for setting standards. As I'm about to explain shortly, what other people are doing might not be in the closet or the toolbox for you to do. And so there are many reasons for that, some of which are beyond our control. So comparisons, although can be inspiring, they're not always helpful. So be wary of those. And so the next slide then brings us to things to remember about the technological world in which we have. The community infrastructure. Because first and foremost, as Bishop John rightly pointed out, some of us live in rural Newfoundland. And there are very few companies that offer high-speed internet. And the advertising is always misleading. Because what you consider high-speed internet and what I consider high-speed internet and what Bell considers it in Harsh Delight and what Bell considers it in Mount Pearl are all different things. And so the infrastructure of the place in which you are ministering has to be a part of your decision process and what technology you're going to do, how often you're going to do it. And so community infrastructure is important. The equipment that you have or don't have, as the case might be. The equipment availability. What can you have? What can you get? What do you have? My parish has always had a 3-year cycle on desktop computers. That is, after 3 years, we recognize that whatever we're running on that computer is probably going to be outdated soon. So a new one is scheduled to be purchased every 3 to 4 years, depending on what's going on. And so that means we're normally left with architecture that's not terribly old. But in some places, I mean, you're operating the PC that was bought for the parish in 2004. And God bless us all. And its capabilities are less than ideal. And so whether or not you have a laptop which has a web camera is about equipment availability. Whether or not you have a phone that's new enough is about availability. And the cost of these items and the quality of these items. I do some Zoom meetings from the other side of this room at my home desktop, which is over there, because on the meetings with 2 or 3 people, I don't need high quality video. And the webcam that's attached to it is a $4 webcam that was picked up out of a bin at a store one day. And so this particular webcam that I'm using now is a much nicer one, and is used for the worship that I do in the mornings. So the quality of what you have also determines what it is you can do and where you can do it. I mean, one of the ironically, the best camera I have is the one attached to my phone, which I can use if I'm on location, as we call it, if I'm at the Wi-Fi up at the building. And so equipment availability, equipment cost, and equipment quality are all concerns that you must be able to work through. And the environment that you're in. Some rooms, are built better for sounds than others. Smaller rooms that you can control usually work a lot better. Some rooms have a natural echo. Some rooms, like the one I'm in now, has a dog living in it. And so if somebody knocks on the door to this house, nobody can hear the broadcast because the dog goes just a little bit fancy. Some neighborhoods have neighbors that like to do things right in the middle of worship with their lawnmower. And so your environment is something that you need to sit down and think about and map out, and your location. Other environmental factors include your family. Throughout the school year, while it was still ongoing with digital learning at home, I couldn't do midday prayer, not because I'm unable and knowing how, but because that's mostly when the online learning was taking place. And if my daughter is doing online digital learning in the next room, I can't be broadcasting in this room because my internet is not that great. And so I switched to a morning prayer schedule, which I've kept, which works well for the time because, well, most everybody else is not using the internet at that hour. And so other internet activities, some of the technologies that you're connected through with the companies you connect depend on what's on the go in the neighborhood. And so your environment must needs be considered in all those factors. And your congregational accessibility. This is a harder one to judge if you haven't been with your congregation for any length of time. Because the question that you must ask yourself is, what can my congregation access? And how well can they access it? Are they able to log on to Facebook? Can they access a website? How many of them actually have internet in their home? I have the advantage of, this is my 12th year in the parish of the Epiphany. And so I know the people as well as most know their people. And so I know the homes that don't have internet. And I know the quality of the internet, which most homes do have it. And so you must needs know, because it's one thing to decide this is what I can do, this is what I have the equipment to do, but if nobody that you're trying to reach can see it, then you've lost your purpose and your focus again. You have to remember that the tools that you use must be able to do a job that people can be a part of. And the other thing to remember is production size doesn't always equal product size. That is, sometimes we can say that we want to do this with all these different types of equipment, but then that requires skills and people we don't have. And sometimes we're doing too big a job, which can lead to a distraction. We can introduce too many variables. I just started using streaming software, which I'll talk about briefly shortly. And one of the things that it did was it introduced yet another part in the process where you can control the volume of your microphone, which was fantastic when I didn't know that. And so I spent a week listening to myself on the internet with the music so muffled and hard because the volume setting was too high in a place I didn't know there was a volume setting. And so you can easily overextend yourself into places that you didn't need to go. And so with that, we'll move to the slide that says, well, what can you do? So the first thing you do is you take an inventory of what skills you do have. To go back to the ocean analogy, look to see what you have to float in the water of technology. Do you have a boat? Do you have a dinghy? Are you floating on a piece of board? Take an inventory of your technical skills. Do you have a Facebook account? Have you ever, how often do you use YouTube? Can you use streaming software? Can you become one of those people who do use streaming software? Let me explain to you the difference. Facebook is an interesting site. As Bishop John noted, it was designed to make money, but can be used for better purposes. And so if you have a Facebook account, some parishes have a Facebook page, some parishes have a Facebook group, and those are two separate things. A page allows you to post to everyone that subscribes. A group similarly so, but also gives you a few other options that are more helpful. But a Facebook group requires people to join. And so you have to invite your congregation, and they have to enlist, and then they can invite other people as well. That's one of the things that has occurred during this. My parish Facebook group has doubled in size since the pandemic started, not by coincidence, of course. And so in these things, you're able to use Facebook. Then you should be able to step up to Facebook Live, which then will bring you into the questions of equipment that you have for doing that. Inventory your equipment. The simplest of all devices is the most common, is a smartphone. With a smartphone, you can log on to Facebook using your phone. You can go to Facebook Live, and you can actually broadcast. And if, as long as you're within range of the Wi-Fi, you can produce a quality broadcasting stream that has audio that people can hear and video that people can see. Yesterday, while I was putting around outside, I went into my shed and I made one of these. I'll show it to you. It looks like a piece of wood because that's all it is. It's an old pew, actually, from St. Matthew's here in Harsey Light, with a piece that now hinges out. And so I can lay it down on the desk, and it holds the phone. That's all it does. It's a cradle. So now the phone looks up at me, and I can start Facebook Live from anywhere and stare into the phone, or the phone can look at me, and I can be reading my book. I can be reading the scriptures, and those are the only tools necessary, the phone and the cradle. You can buy the fancy cradles that look like plush puppy dogs at the Dollarama. Trust me. And so the equipment you have will determine what you're able to do. Most people have tablets and or a laptop, and laptops and tablets have webcams and microphones built in, which have lovely capabilities, but also have quality issues if you're using it for extra bigger things. The equipment must also include digital licenses. If you're going to be streaming things, you enter into a new legal world that you need to learn and read about. And our diocese has produced quite a bit of stuff on that. And Greg Mercer, the next presenter, has produced quite a bit of documentation on that and can be very helpful with it. And the last thing you must inventory is your helpers. What do the people that you have close contact with, what skills do they have? What can they do for you? Can they hold a camera? Can they provide music? Can they be a part of the people who actually upload the video? So 3 different types of inventory that needs to take place. What can you do in terms of your technical skills? What kind of equipment do you have access to or get access to? Because trust me, if you want to buy a web camera, now is not the time. Every store that I check is sold out completely of every name brand web camera. And so it's a different type of world in that regard. And so we're working with what we have, not with what we'd like to have sometimes. So that brings us to the next slide, which is what's available. And so there are many options. The first and foremost, publication, recording something. There are many ways in which we can record something. Recorded videos are done, like I said, you can use phones. If you're using it in a church space, then you got to worry about the sound, because the further away you get from the phone, the further away you get from the microphone. And so then you have to use the sound system at the church and get it so that the phone is somehow close to a speaker. Some people are using cameras. Some people have the luxury of a production company. And what I mean by that is they have somebody with the skills to bring an actual camera and a microphone and can be there to move with you and to record, which is great. But, it depends on, again, what you did in your inventory, what's available to you. And so even for using a desktop PC with a web camera, the microphone that's built in is all the way up here. And so the sound that reaches that is not always the best. And so sometimes getting a separate microphone that you can lay on the desk in front of you will increase your quality quite well. When you record a video, you have the option then, if you have the proper software, of recording it to a DVD. Most computers bought in the last 5 years have software that came with or can be downloaded for to create that. It can be posted to a website if your parish has a website. And so we designed, the Parish of the Epiphany launched a website a month and a half ago for the purpose of having a place to host online videos. Online file sharing. Some places are into being able to use stuff that comes with your PC, like Dropbox or Microsoft OneDrive, and then being able to share a document publicly to those who can access it. But all of those options are lovely, but again, it must reflect what people are able to access. And so that's a publication that you do beforehand, which gives you the opportunity and the comfort of knowing that you've done it, and you've done it in the way in which you like. And then you move into the area of broadcasting live. Broadcasting live has the advantage that when it's done, and what you've done, you've done. But it has the disadvantage of course, requiring heavily on the internet connection. Facebook maintains one of the simpler ways of broadcasting, because you simply click live and you click on your webcam and away you go. Or you click on Stream Key and you use streaming software and away you go. And you produce what it is that's being said. YouTube also allows for live features if you sign up for a YouTube account. And so as long as you're able to produce the video, you can direct it to YouTube. And so those are streaming software sites that allow you to, whatever it is that you're doing at your computer, at your phone, or wherever your space is, to broadcast it and people to access it. They do require having people to get the knowledge out as to how to access it, of course. There are other software that allow people to gather in meetings. Adobe Connect, GoToMeeting are money options that are very sophisticated and very well done, but not necessarily for broadcasting worship live. Zoom, it can be used twofold. For meetings, obviously, many of you have been included in Zoom meetings, but then that meeting can be broadcast live, so you could use a Zoom meeting as your worship, which is very helpful. Microsoft has Teams. Facebook now has Rooms, and all these software manufacturers are rushing to get to the forefront their ability to provide software and options for people to meet online. Google has Google Meetings. Each of it requires you to be aware of your web camera and the microphone that you're using. Again, a phone is the simplest of the hardware options, and you can join in on any of these meetings using a phone very easily. But it is a little trickier to actually host one of those meetings using a phone, because all you have for input is the phone itself. And so finding options and everything else are a little more difficult. And so they're better managed using a PC or a laptop or a tablet. And the other technological piece that Bishop John focused on quite well is the telephone. It reaches the areas, the nets that the other digital parts cannot. It goes places that other technology has never been. And so it enables you to know and to understand that there are ways to connect with people. Because I'll go back to the beginning there. The point of all of this is to continue the tradition of proclaiming the word. The point of all of this is to connect and to be heard by your people. And so whether you're investing in publication or broadcasting, telephone is always present and always there. And it does wonderful and great things in giving that personal touch to the relationships that are required. So with all of that, there are many different ways that we can do it. My hope for each of you as you find yourself in the vast ocean of technology is it isn't as vast as it scarily looks, but there are some places where you'll find that you can stand up, and you can find a comfort level with what you're doing, and it needs to be exactly that, what you're doing, not what somebody else is doing, because what you're doing is dependent on all the environment variables that are out there, that I've tried to touch on. The list is not exhaustive by any means, because there's a lot of different methodologies and a lot of different technologies out there. You need to find the one that in your region is manageable, and is doable and doesn't totally exhaust all of the resources of both you, your parish, and your people. So with all of those things, I commend you to keep all of that in mind, and all of that as you make your decisions as to how you're going to embrace the digital world. Find people that can help. Find people that can teach. Find people that can do. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to go back before this started and to offer a lovely little seminar. And this is how you create a Facebook group. We don't have the ability. As I've said, we're learning to drive when you got to drive to the meeting to learn how to drive. And so we have to learn the technology whilst using the technology, both us and our people. Don't forget that for some of them, this is the first time they've had internet. For some of them, this is the first time they've signed on to Facebook. And they're trying to find your parish, and they're trying to find your video, and the video doesn't work, or they click on the wrong thing. Your job is both to learn how to use the technology and to be the coach of how others might engage the technology. And that should inform and decide what road you take and what you use. So I hope all of that is of some help, and enables you to make a decision a little bit closer to what it is you can do or could be doing, or at least gives you the terms to Google and look up so that you might figure out what it is that best able to be done for you. And that's where I'll end it and turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Eli. Great presentation. I really appreciated you putting together the inventories, suggesting how people can kind of sort for themselves what might be, where they might be and what they might need to do. I know there'll be some questions to you when we come to that section in a few moments. We'll pass it on to you, Greg. Turn on your mic, turn on your camera. I think you have them on already, and way to go.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, thanks Rick, and thanks to Queens again for this, opportunity to be a part of this learning experience. And I've been asked to give some tips for effective and efficient digital ministries. And where to start was the problem with this, of course. So I thought as a prelude to this, we would go back and look at some of the questions and the points made by last week's presenters, because they gave us these questions to ponder, and to ponder I did. And a lot of those questions feeds into, I guess, my presentation. So they did a great job, the presenters last week, and here's some of the questions they left us with. Reverend Keith started off with some questions like this. He said, are we doing anything remotely what we are called to do for God in the digital world? Are we being faithful or just trying to hang on, survival mode? Or are we reaching anyone with our online preaching, and what does the numbers tell us? So there's some great questions. And then Carmel, of course, introduced us to the evolution of different models of church and ministry over the years, only to remind us that the Spirit may very well be leading us in some new direction, opening the church of the future in a new model. I think we're kind of experiencing that right now, actually. Well, moving right along, Reverend Paul introduced us to some of the pros and cons of online worship and left us with this question. She said, is online worship real worship? Well, what a great question. And then, of course, Bishop Jeff, along with the Bishop John today, introduced us, or reminded us, it should say, of the importance of maintaining a focus on mission. And in the digital world, using technology effectively in joining God on that mission, the Missio Dei. Reverend Robert Cook got us thinking about the theological implications of technology with questions like what are digital technologies doing to us, and what do they reveal about God? And finally, these couple of questions from Reverend Keith that I'll use as a segue to my presentation. What are we aiming to accomplish, and what we're aiming to accomplish in our electronic communications, and what might we compensate or adjust to do a better job? So I would like to think that what we're trying to accomplish and what we aim to accomplish on any given Sunday morning when we gather with our people is to offer them the best liturgical experience. Most of our online worship is devotional worship. To give them the best liturgical experience as possible so that we can send them forth inspired, fulfilled, and renewed in their commitment to God, just like we do on any Sunday morning. Which brings me to this topic, liturgy on the edge. Liturgy on the edge, that place where we enjoy and embody God, to celebrate God, and to stay close to the community that it serves. So Rick have already put up the next slide there, liturgy on the edge. And let me say, first of all, that that's not a title that I came up out of my own creativity. That's in fact the title of a book. Here it is here. If some of you want to pick it up and read it at some time, or that way, Liturgy on the Edge, Pastoral and Attractional Worship, edited by Samuel Wells, which was and probably still is the vicar of St. Martin in the Field, London. So I start here because what we offer matters, it matters immensely. And offering a liturgy that is not only creative and missional, but focused, clear, intelligible, and free from the noise and the feedback and all the other ambient noises. All this is foundational to creating a holy experience and dismissing our people to go and to serve the Lord as we do on a Sunday morning. So the question is it possible to do that online with online worship? I love that picture that on that slide that Rick presented there. It's the picture of an orchestra, of course, with the choir in the background. Overlooking that is the dome within the cathedral and our Lord at the center. During my days at Queen's College, our liturgy instructor compared liturgy to an orchestra, whereby the priest, which is the worship leader, is the conductor. And like a conductor, the worship leader has the responsibility of bringing all the different pieces, the work of the people, all these different pieces together in an harmonized way in order to create an experience for the people to enter into and to leave inspired, or as we would say, touched by God. That's what liturgy is meant to do. So that's much more difficult to do online than it is, of course, with a gathered community. Nevertheless, there is the foundational principle, I think, of what we're trying to accomplish. What must we compensate or adjust or add or create in order to offer an online liturgical experience that captures the hearts and minds of our people? And with that in mind, I want to say a few words about acoustical design. Rick, the next slide. So here in this picture, you have a picture of a course, and the one on the left is a cathedral with its vaulted ceiling, all bricks and mortar and hardwood. And then on the right, you have a picture of a modern church built for contemporary worship, live bands, and these sorts of things. And you can't help but notice the sound-absorbing panels on the back wall. And of course, those panels are all around the church. So I'm no acoustical engineer, but as an electronic technician, I guess, and probably more so, the very fact that I played in the band for almost 20 years before I answered the call to ordination. I've had my share of challenges in trying to set up PA systems and amplifiers in all kinds of settings, from small clubs like Legions with low ceilings packed with people, to large gymnasiums with all plywood and steel and only half full. Quite frustrating sometimes. So the first thing we need to understand, of course, that many of our churches, which are old and creaky, were not designed for public address systems. They're full of echo, they're full of reverberation. They're great for choral music, large choirs, someone up front with a thundering voice, even though it may not be that intelligible, at least it reverberates throughout the building. But they are not designed for PA systems. I think the general rule is that if you stood in the center of your worship space, or even from the chancel area, and you clap your hand, of course you're going to get an echo. The general rule is that echo continued on beyond 1 second, then you have a problem. Not with the sound system, but the acoustical design. So here's what happens. All that reverb and all that echo gets fed back through the PA system. Moreover, unlike modern worship space, which like I said, is designed with all kinds of sound-absorbing panels around the room, in our churches, we get a lot of what's called slapback echo. So in addition to the natural echo of the building, the reverberation, all the sound from the speaker system is bouncing off the walls in all kinds of directions, causing more distortion. So you have all this unwanted sound energy creating more problems. I heard it explained this way. You're driving along in a car, and except for a little bit of road noise, you're able to have a fine conversation with the person sitting next to you. A little bit warm, you put down the window. So all of a sudden now you got the sound of the traffic outside, you got all this wind flutter through the windows and things like that. And all of a sudden you got a strain to kind of listen to what the other person's saying. You got to raise your voice to say what you intended, probably even look towards that person. All this other sound energy, creating all kinds of problems. So that's kind of what happens in live streaming from church buildings. You're speaking into your microphone, but all this extra sound energy is also getting fed back through your microphone and your amplifiers twice over. So if our foundational principle is to provide a liturgy, a worship experience that is clear and intelligible and transformative for our listeners, how do we deal with all this reverberation and echo? Next slide. Rick? So I don't see anyone rushing out to put sound panels around their church buildings or anything like that, even though I understand that's a very inexpensive thing to do. It's a DIY job if you want to do it. But one solution, of course, is audio interfaces. You see, because you can tolerate some loss in video quality, but not audio quality. In fact, bad audio not only goes against the idea of creating a good online liturgical experience, but you'll lose people. People will sign off right away if the audio is bad. So what you need then, you need a dedicated microphone feeding directly into your iPad or iPhone, or an external camera that's also already has an audio interface built into it. Or better still, use an audio interface like the one shown in your picture here on the slideshow. You got an audio interface to your left. To the right, you got some cameras with built-in audio interfaces in them. Or here's another one. This is my own personal one, audio interface, much like the one on the left. So just to let me give you a couple of examples, and Bishop John and Reverend Eli both have pointed out, of course, we got to be careful when we use examples for comparison. We're not comparison, we're only trying to learn, to get ideas and to learn and to share those ideas with one another. So here's a couple of examples. The Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, or the Anglican Cathedral, uses what they call a PTZ camera. Now that's like the one on the far left there in your picture, a PTZ camera. And PTZ simply stands for panning left to right, tilting up and down, or to zoom in and out, all at the touch of a remote. So you can do that with that camera. They have a built-in audio interface in them, which allows them to speak through their microphones in the church, fed through their mixer in the church, and the church mixer then ties into the audio interface. Of course, you need the computer software to go along with it. But it gives excellent sound quality. Excellent sound quality. The cathedral has never sounded better. In fact, it's far better than if you were there in person. In fact, that's twice now I've used in fact. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go to the cathedral anymore to worship. Don't tell Archdeacon Roger that. Because the experience, the quality of sound is unreal compared to being there in person. So that's one example. As a second example, I don't know if you noticed it or not, but I did. I picked up on it right away, actually. Among the presenters from last week, Reverend Robert Cook was the only one using a dedicated microphone instead of the computer mic. And I couldn't help but notice that the quality of sound was vastly improved over some of the other presenters. And not only that, he was using what's called a condenser type microphone, which is much better for small studio setup, like in a home or something like that, as compared to live worship from the church. So feeding our vocals and or our instrument, like a guitar or a keyboard or something like that, into the audio interface, which is tied into our sound system, vastly improves the audio quality, eliminating all this echo and feedback and creaking noise and all the other ambient sounds that distracts the listener from having a great liturgical experience. Next slide, Rick. So here we have on the left a teleprompter and on the right a tripod. I'm guessing that that I could be wrong. I know I was wrong once, so far in the past I can't even remember when it was. But I'm guessing that none of our live streaming is via the use of a teleprompter, and for good reason, because we're book people. I'm speaking, of course, to Anglicans, and I want to be sensitive to other people that are probably listening in. But the point is that we are using our liturgy online when we use books, just like we'd use them in the church and with everyone else with their face in the book. But that's not what's happening online. Instead, they are watching and listening. Most of them, there may be a few following along in books, I don't know, but most of the time they're just watching and listening. So why use a teleprompter? Well, a teleprompter places the words right in front of you on the screen. If you look closely at that picture, I don't know if you can see it or not, but if you look closely at that picture and on that slide, you see the words on the screen, and on the back of the words, you can probably see the image of the camera. So the camera is right behind the teleprompter. So you're looking at the screen, the camera's not picking up the words. So you're looking at the screen and the camera is looking at you. And the people can't see the words either, of course. So a teleprompter allows you to speak directly into the camera. It allows you to speak directly in the camera instead of looking down or looking away at notes or trying to find that we finished off in the book or something else that you might be presenting. It gives your viewers that experience of speaking to them directly and personally. particularly during the sermon. You wouldn't do it all the time, but particularly during parts of the liturgy like the invitation or the absolution, and particularly during the sermon. It could be very transformative for the viewer when you're looking directly into the camera. Moreover, it gives you the freedom of using hand gestures or any other expressions that you would do during your preaching from the pulpit. I think we've all had the experience of being in church and listening to a sermon, a good sermon, when the preacher just happened to look your way, catch your eye, and say something about God or something about our human circumstances or our human condition that you needed to hear that day, even if you didn't know it. So those moments are rare, but they're very moving, and that can happen to others as well online. The same preparation and dedication we go into sermon preparation, and in particular its delivery on Sunday morning, applies equally to online streaming. And being able to speak to people directly, to look at them, look directly into the camera when you say something, can be very transformative. So I know I've been asked on a few occasions to play and sing some recorded songs for pre-recorded worship, and believe me, I need all the help I can get. So I use a teleprompter along with my audio interface to do that. And that allows me then to look directly into the camera. I don't have to be fumbling, looking down at song sheets, the possibility of probably striking it and losing it and getting on the floor and all this stuff. It's all there on the screen right in front of me, all the lyrics and all the chords and everything. They're right in front of me, and I'm looking into the camera all the time. So that can give people a great experience to do that. So that's just something to consider. You may not be comfortable with that, but that's certainly something to consider, the use of a teleprompter. And finally, just a word about tripods. Now, this may seem like a moot point, but for God's sake, get a good tripod, a good quality tripod, something that can reach to about 6 feet, even 7 feet. Some even goes to 7 feet. Get a good quality tripod because it deals with the line of sight in our churches, especially. They deal with the line they eliminate the chancels and the sanctuaries that's up, and you're not just kind of looking down. Moreover, you can have them at a distance. And secondly, the tripod, people not only want to see you, they want to be able to see that beautiful chancel. They want to be able to see the hangings and the lit candles and the cross and the stained glass windows and all of those other icons that speak the word of God to our viewers. All those things are important. So with a tripod, you don't have to be right up close to your camera, your iPhone or smartphone or tablet, but it can be backed off. So the tripod with the mounted camera or the tablet or the PTZ camera, anything that can be done remotely, or even you see the handle on it there, even manually, is very important. Remembering, of course, that the foundational principle is to create a liturgical experience in which your viewers can have an encounter with God, be transformed by that liturgical experience, and then dismissed to go and serve the Lord. So that next slide, just to bring things to a conclusion here in my presentation. I'll leave you with a few points and questions to ponder. I'll get to that in a second. But like I said, where to start and where to end with all of this, it's so difficult. There's so much we can talk about. We can talk about things like live streaming from the church versus small group setup for the home, or the different and the best types of microphones for each kind of setup to enhance the whole devotional experience. All that matters. What's the best setup for each and the type of microphone to be used? Do you want to be able to pan in, or to tilt up and down, to zoom in, and all that stuff matters. Many of our churches are using old and outdated analog equipment. So if there's a whole new model of church on the horizon, that calls for a great use of technology, then is there a need for us now to think about investing in newer digital equipment as opposed to analog equipment, which provides better video and audio quality, and hence a better liturgical experience. As we are reminded from last week, the Spirit is opening doors for a model of church, or church of the future, that is here to stay. Or as someone else said, you know, when all this is over, we're going to have a second congregation. We're all going to be multi-point parishes, because we got the second congregation online. So with that, then there's a couple of questions then to consider, points to ponder. What is it we do well in our liturgy during a physical gathering of the faithful that we can recreate in our digital world and do it just as good or even better? And does our liturgy always have to be by the book? Liturgy on the edge suggests something creative, something that meets particular missional criteria. So with that, Rick, I'll pass it back to you.
Well, thank you, Greg. Great presentation, lots of practical stuff, and a great progression right through from each of the presenters today, starting with Tanya, Bishop John, Eli, and now yourself, Greg. What I want to bring us to now is the section in these seminars that describe as facilitators, the windjammer, where we're trying to get every ounce of puff and wind that we can to get us where we want to go. And so a way of doing it is to, first of all, allow the panelists a moment if they have particular comments, something they want to add what they've said before, or connect a point of their own with that of another. We'll allow a few moments for that, and then we'll open it up again to the entire audience to hear questions, comments, or particular observations and suggestions that people who have lots of experience with this stuff might want to share with the rest of the group. So first of all, I'll ask Tanya, Bishop John, Eli, or Greg if there's anything that you want to kind of add to what you've said before. I'll ask the panelists as well as others to please turn on your microphone, just reminding you to do that. And if you want to turn on your camera as well when you're making your question or comment. If you aren't one of the panelists, then I ask you to tell us who you are before you present your comments. But the panelists first. Anyone to comment on
it? Rick, I would probably say, and I may have already been said, I think I have actually, the importance of getting help with a lot of this stuff. You know, again, there's so much out there, it's unreal, and it's all been a frustrating learning experience for a lot of us. So getting you know, answering questions and getting people to help us with the setup of all this stuff, and what are some of the best options, and the different types of equipment to use, how it's all pieced together, even, you know, the anatomy of all this stuff. You know, I mean, where do we put that? How do we plug that in? Where does it go? I mean, there's so many things in this in the use of this technology that can enhance the liturgical experience. So getting help, looking at what other congregations do as getting ideas, or getting the people in our professional, you know, they understand this stuff, and helping us be able to say, look, you know, this will work for you. This is a budget thing that can work for you, and here's how it will work, and here, you know, so getting that help is very, very important.
Great, thanks, Greg. And it was a point Eli made as well, is recruiting people who can be of assistance. Any of the other panelists? I'll just ask a question that the panelists or others might want to jump in on as well, and that is, like, I guess it comes with how we embrace change. Change typically comes in two major categories: things that come by choice, or things that come by circumstances. This is largely driven by the circumstances of the global pandemic. But as leaders in organizations, the challenge then is to say, okay, now that we're in the situation, what do I have control over? In other words, what choices can we make? What decisions? I just kind of want to throw it out there too. ask what your experiences are in terms of the structures and processes for making decisions in congregations and in dioceses as well at a time like this. Are the people who are typically involved in vestries or parish councils, finance committees, whatever structures might be there, are they embracing the need to make decisions about digital ministries and the technologies and the purchases and the recruitments or whatever have to be done? Are they kind of embracing this stuff, or is the decision-making processes on a kind of an obstacle to moving things forward? Ask any of you from your experience if you have a comment on that one. Not hearing anything. Is it because there are no microphones on, or my questions?
I would say that most people are embracing it, as you know, we're in the structure here in our diocese of Western Newfoundland of, you know, looking at reopening our church buildings, and in meeting with parish council, you know, the importance of what has happened over the last 3 months continuing in some way, shape, or form, so that those who are shut in or those who are in long-term care or retirement homes, that we could still provide them with services even after our church buildings opens. And, you know, I think that it's looking beyond just the survival. And I think many of the parishes throughout all Newfoundland and Labrador were looking at survival and how can church survive. That, you know, we're more looking at now beyond survival into a revival. And that, you know, this digital time of ministry can be the Pentecost of 2020 if we embrace it.
Great, interesting. Thanks for that comment, Tanya. Any others? Folks, I'll open it then to any attendees who may have a question or a comment or particular suggestion or observation of your own to share it with the attendees. I remind you again, please turn on your microphone as you participate in this.
Hello, Bill Strong here.
Bill, great to have you.
Great to be here. I have a myriad of questions, but I'll try to keep it to where I'm at St. Peter's in Upper Gullies, of course, and there's a couple of things we're interested in. We sort of, I've been using very basics, just my iPhone for and Facebook, and but there's a couple of things we're probably be able to take this now that we're with the possibility of opening the church building. Of course, we have to set up the building so that we can have live worship with the congregation and also stream while that's going on. And so that's going to be present a couple of challenges. One of the things which I would also like to see if we could rig up or move to and using that would probably be the possibility of using monitors for our worship, and also, as Reverend Greg mentioned, that we could also use monitors for for the service and so on. Because in terms of we probably will be called to move away from even using books if the pandemic continues and we're able to have live worship, because people will not, we won't be able to share books anymore, right? And so that's another consideration. There's two things is, and I really like I'm very much reliant on the advice of others, and sometimes it's not always as the hands-on exactly advice that you need isn't as advice. So is there a pool that we can go to, or should I just start making calls to folks who have stuff, who are doing stuff that I'd like to be with? Like, I'd like to be able to set up to introduce having some TV screens. I also like to ask the question is, for using audio, we have just upgraded our audio system at St. Peter's, and I'd like to be able to use that audio system because the church building is very acoustically well, and I've been able to have good audio simply by using my phone, because I use the audio system in the church ambient sound, and it seems to work very well. So that's one thing. The other question is, will I be required to have a dedicated video volunteer when we start having live services again? And that is a question as I have to. So those are two starters. And also, I'm interested in the idea of streaming, because the streaming would enable you to go live on both Facebook and YouTube at the same time, and so that would be a positive. And so I have some questions around there. So those are some basic things, but I'm very still much with a toe in the water here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Interesting questions, and I'll ask those with way more expertise than I do, which is zero. Bishop John, Eli, Greg, what your responses are to the matters that Bill has raised.
Yeah, well, that's a bag full, Bill. I don't even know where to start with all of that, to be quite honest with you. But I think I've listened in and joined in on some of Bill's worship at St. Peter's, and surprisingly is that the little church, the acoustics is not too bad at all, and the audio is pretty good. Now you're pretty close to your camera. That's the only thing, though. So it's probably picking up more of your voice than it is from the sound system in the church, which allows your audio to be okay. But if you wanted to move that back so people can get a better view of your chancel area and things like that, well, that's going to affect your audio. And what you're going to get and feeding into your iPhone is what's coming through the PA system. That's not good. But I think one of the things you touched on is that, you know, as we move forward on this here, it's still going to be. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just getting a little bit of interference there. I think Marie Kelsey, I got to get you to turn off your microphone, Marie.
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to say, like, as you move forward, you know, having screens in your church, you know, and monitors, video monitors and audio monitors, and all these things, all this a part of the technology, and these are the things you're going to have to build upon. But on a go forward basis, you're going to need someone in your congregation who's able to help you with that stuff, because even if you're able to operate that remotely on a Sunday morning, you don't want to be tampering with another remote, something else that you got to remember to press a button on to bring it in to do this or to do something else. You need someone to be able to control and have that controller for you at your mixing board, at your audio video, at your tripod, whatever the case may be. I'm not sure if that addressed your question or not.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And yeah, it's you know, later on we'll have a chat. Thank you.
That's great. Eli, do you have any comments to the questions and issues that Bill has raised? I'll ask you then, Bishop John.
Well, the use of introducing new technologies into the space that we have comes with, well, you need to be more keen on what your environment is. Because if you're going to bring in screens, well, where are you going to put them? What are you going to cover up to put those screens up? And so all of those things are highly dependent on what you have and where you are. And so whether or not some congregations might not be able to continue to broadcast live if they have a live congregation. I mean, you have to work within the reality that you're presented with and the circumstances you have. And so, you know, it will be a mix of what it is that you're able to acquire and what it is you're able to do. And so God bless us all. It's an interesting time. And hopefully there will indeed be many a place that is able to configure, using all the tools that are available, at least something that there's a product out there for people to continue to binge watch as it is worship on Sundays. So I think, you know, it's about getting your space tailor fit with the technologies that work in your space. And so that comes about from learning what's available and seeing what's out there.
I guess the big question I have for all of us is, with until we have the vaccine, are we safe to be giving people paper to if they're going to be live with us? And can we leave? We have our churches are filled with pews filled with books, and if that could be a medium for the spreading of disease, that becomes an issue for us. And has there been any consideration given to that sad reality?
Bishop John, you ready to make a comment?
Well, just that I do believe that as a church in our time, the ongoing flow. I like what Tanya said, about this might be a time of a new Pentecost. I've been saying that for quite a while. I'm not quite sure that technology is going to be the main feature of that, although it's going to be a very important player. We have no choice. The whole thing of the developed world is being caught in capitalism, and I know, like I would want to say more about that, but technology and capitalism are intertwined, and in the same way, I think that Jesus lovingly challenged the system. We have to approach it that way. But what I want to say, my main point is that God is in all that we are doing as a church. We're in for a time of great change. We were long before COVID-19. And I've been working in our own diocese with our leadership to provide encouragement, asking our clergy and our lay people to remember that moment when you first gave your heart to Christ and made a commitment to your vocation. And start from there as much as you can. Start from there. And as long as we work together with respect, love, and unity, we're going to get through this, and we're going to do fine. I know as a diocese, just to say, we're one of the few dioceses in the country that we did not meet the eligibility requirements to receive government funding to assist us with a loss of income. By and large, our income sources improved their offerings. That's not to say that we're comparing this to anyone else, but for me, that's a sign of great hope that there's this level of energy and interest in the church still, in the institution and the traditional church, and people are still wanting to be part of the family. So I take great hope in that. So for those of you who presented today, I want to say that the three of you did a fantastic job. I really appreciate what you had to say. Anyway, Rick, I could go on, but I'll just stop now.
Okay, I'm just going to take a moment to bring up a couple of text messages I received in the chat room on the meeting dashboard. One says, there's a lot to talk about how to put, there's a lot of talk about how to put what we used to do in a church building online. Is there a difference in the way people worship online that might make this kind of spectator worship inapplicable? Another puts, will our new technical assistants be our new servers? Will this be a new ministry in the church rather than a volunteer status? And the last one is, with so many in our congregations, older people, can we ensure that the sound system is able to be streamed to hearing aid devices? So those are just a few things, but people might have comments on them before we move to the last component of our session, which is our reflection to be led by Greg Mercer. Bishop John, do you want to follow up on either of those comments?
Well, regard to the new service in the church being technologists, yeah, I think that's fantastic. I've always found that a great way to get young people involved. And in regard to sound systems and PA systems, it is not too hard to hook them up to the hearing projection devices. Some of our churches have been doing that over this way. And Greg, you could probably speak to that. I think when it comes to worship, as Greg said again, we have to do the best we can to make sure our quality of presentation is good, but not to overthink it. You don't have to be slick in your presentation, just sincere, but you need to invest time in learning about the technology, learning what you can and cannot do. And I can pretty much promise everyone that it will be a much better product. There are a number of digital condenser microphones. I just say this, I use a microphone called an iRig HD. You can buy it from IK Multimedia, one of the best microphones I've ever owned. And I've got some, like, I got one microphone that cost over $600, and this one is less than 150. It's the best microphone I've ever had. So I'd say any of you out there who want to get some tips or directly send Greg and Eli an email or send me one, and we can might be able to make some recommendations for good equipment for you. Just don't forget that the Spirit of God is in all of this. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Bishop John. Eli or Greg, any comment before we move to the reflection? Okay, Greg, I'll pass it to you to lead us through the reflection. And to all those who have attended, thank you. You can connect with Bishop John or Eli or Greg with any follow-up questions, particularly about technical things. This session is being recorded, and so we'll be putting out the link for the YouTube viewing for those who might want it. And don't forget, if you have any thoughts or ideas or suggestions of matters that we might bring to the discussion next week, you can please just send me the suggestion so I can pass it on to the planning group. Greg, pass it to you, my friend.
Yeah, okay, you bring up the first slide there. Yeah, okay, so I thought I'd end with, I like what Carmel did last week, so I guess I'm stealing her idea, but end with some holy listening. And I tried to find a passage of scripture that talked about live streaming, but not a lot there. So I decided to go with a passage from Luke chapter 10, a few short verses from Luke chapter 10. Of course, as you know, Luke 10 is all about sending out, Jesus sending out the 70 or the 72, depending on which version you read. The reading is going to be on the screen, but again, I would ask, as Carmel did, resist the temptation to read along with me. This is a listening process. So we really want for you just to listen, close your eyes if you have to. And again, during this first reading, we're not looking for any commentary or interpretation. We're just looking, whatever jumps off the page, whatever jumps out to you, I guess, in listening, you know, some word or phrase or image or feeling or question or anything like that. And then we'll have just a minute or so after that to share some of your discoveries. Okay, so the first reading, next screen, Rick. Luke chapter 10, verses 1 to 9, and this is from the NRSV, and they've entitled this The Mission of the 70. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say peace to this house. And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the laborer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you. Cure the sick who are there, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. The word of the Lord. So we can leave that on the screen for your benefit. So again, what jumps out at you in that reading? What word or phrase or thought or even feeling? So let's just take a minute to share that.
It's Carmel. I think what strikes me most is the sense of stepping out into an unknown with faith in the message that you carry, not in yourself, but in that message that you carry, and keeping it simple.
Thank you, Carmel.
Partaking of whatever they provide.
Okay. Anyone else?
There, it sort of implies that you're not going to have success all the time. You're not going to be accepted in every place. The peace is going to come back to you sometimes.
To whatever house you enter, return to
The kingdom of God is near to you.
Greet no one.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, let's move on to the next slide. So this time, a second reading, and what I'm going to be asking you to look for here is the underlying theme. Why are they being sent out? Why are they being sent out? What's the underlying theme? See if that comes through in any way. And then what are some of the secondary themes? In other words, those things that help them accomplish the main theme, the task. So how they're related, why are Jesus sending them out? What's the underlying theme? And secondary themes, those things that support the task. Okay, so again, just listen in, try to listen in without reading along if you can. I'll ask Rick to bring up the next screen. So this one is from the Contemporary English Version, and they've entitled it The Work of the 72 Followers. And again, it's from Luke chapter 10, verses 1 to 9. Later, the Lord chose 72 other followers and sent them out 2 by 2 to every town and village where he was about to go. He said to them, "A large crop is in the fields, but there are only a few workers. Ask the Lord in charge of the harvest to send out workers to bring it in. Now go, but remember, I am sending you out like lambs into a pack of wolves. Don't take along a money bag or a traveling bag or sandals, and don't waste time greeting people on the road. As soon as you enter a home, say, 'God bless this home with peace.' If the people living there are peace-loving, your prayer for peace will bless them. But if they are not peace-loving, your prayer will return to you. Stay with the same family, eating and drinking whatever they give you, because workers are worth what they earn. Don't move around from house to house. If the people of a town welcome you, eat whatever they offer, heal their sick, and say, God's kingdom will soon be here. The word of the Lord. So again, we'll leave it on the screen for you. And the questions is, what's the main theme? Why are they being sent out? And any secondary themes that may relate or support that first theme. So I invite your feedback, comments.
Carmel again. First, I thought that it was to prepare the way for Jesus. But then I really listened, and it's not. It's to prepare the way for the kingdom. And I think that's the big message. And maybe one of the secondary messages there is, you're being sent out, but you aren't the workers. That's another group. You're being sent out with a message. The workers you are not them.
Any others? Well, one of the reasons I ask those questions in that way is because, like when we go online, when we're live streaming or pre-recording or whatever the case may be, it's important to understand the purpose or the aim of what we're trying to accomplish. So, in this here, what's Jesus trying to accomplish? Why is he sending them out? So in the same way, we really have to think some ways in which what we're called to do or what we're trying to do. All right, Rick, so we'll move on to our next one. So in this one here, again, we're trying to bring in this third reading now, we're trying to bring it forward into the present. So what is this passage saying to us, if anything, about our current situation? Are there underlying principles in this passage that we can identify? Are there any underlying principles? And if so, what are they? And do they say anything about the live streaming or the electronic communications in which we use? Is there a connection there anywhere? Is there anything in this passage that we use as a principle that helps us connect with people and these sorts of things? So these are just trying to bring it into the contemporary. So thinking about those questions, we may come back to them, but we'll bring up the passage, Rick, and the next screen. Yeah, so here we're reading from the Message, Luke chapter 10, and Dave entitled it, Lambs in a Wolf Pack. So again, try to listen without reading along. Later, the master selected 70 and sent them ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he intended to go. He gave them this charge: what a huge harvest, and how few the harvest hands. So on your knees, ask the God of the harvest to send out harvest hands. On your way, but be careful, this is hazardous work. You're like lambs in a wolf pack. Travel light, comb and toothbrush, and no extra luggage. Don't loiter and make small talk with everyone you meet along the way. When you enter a home, greet the family, peace. If your greeting is received, then it's a good place to stay. But if it's not received, take it back and get out. Don't impose yourself. Stay at the home, taking your meals, all your meals there, for a worker deserves 3 square meals. Don't move from house to house looking for the best cook in town. When you enter a town and are received, eat what they set before you. Heal anyone who is sick and tell them God's kingdom is right at your doorstep. The word of the Lord. So Rick, probably we can go back to the screen before that, just to bring those questions fresh to the forefront again. Yeah, okay, so the question, what is this passage saying about us, if anything, about current situation? And are there underlying principles? And if so, what are they? And what do they say? And do they say anything to us about our present situation?
Hello, Reverend Mercer. I will take a stab at it. This is Nicole Critch, a little nervous here. Dr. Rick, can you show the scripture again, please? The huge harvest would recognize how many people can be reached through technology. All of the eyes and ears that could be potentially linked to your computer. The few harvest hands are those clergy who are going in blind. Not a lot. We don't have as many clergy workers as other industries. They talk about hazardous work like lambs in a wolf pack, because I enjoyed the analogy of Dr. Eli Evans, Reverend Eli Evans, when he spoke of a massive ocean, and it's like you're treading water, and you will always have judgmental people, and then you have the wolf of your own self-confidence and self-esteem eating back at you. Traveling light. When we speak of technology, we can become overwhelmed with, again, focusing on the best products. And we only have to realize that our 2 feet and our hands holding the most beautiful book ever produced is the most important we have to keep in mind. We have a lot of sick people, and the church is the hospital. And I think that as long as we don't lose focus and we only do what we can, not feel pressured by technology, then things will be okay. Thank you.
A chance for one more comment if anyone want to make a comment on it before we close with prayer.
Cynthia here. What really strikes me is the very first thing he says to them is, so on your knees, ask the God of the harvest to send harvest hands. And I think that's your first step.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rick. I know we're going a little over time. So prayer time. The best prayer is biblical prayer. So we're just going to take on a minute, that's all, and allow the word to shape your prayer silently. Of course, we're not. So take a moment to reflect on the passage. You may want to consider what it says about priorities, the main thing, why we're doing what we're doing, or what it says about change, and offer that to God. But the point is allow the word right now to shape your prayer. And we're just going to take 1 minute. I'll time it, and after a minute, I'll offer a little concluding prayer. So let's do that now. So amen to your prayers. So we'll conclude with this little prayer here, and even though it's a prayer that we're familiar with, if we've goes around our in cycles, I think, but it's a prayer that I think a mission prayer that comes from the Methodist tradition. Let us pray. Living God, pour out your Spirit upon your church. Grant us a new vision of your glory, a new experience of your power, a new faithfulness to your word, and a new commitment to your service, that your love may grow among us, flow out from us, and bring the fullness of your kingdom to this community. For Jesus' sake, amen. Turn it back to you, Rick.
Amen. And thank you, Greg. Well led and well facilitated. Thank you very much. Folks, I just want to do a couple of things in the wrap up. One is to mention again, if our third in the three-part series is next week, same time, 10 o'clock on Wednesday, same link. If you have any questions or issues that you'd like to have addressed in that session on personal and professional wellness, send them along. I want to note also that I received one final chat message there from Nancy March. She asked if there will be anything set up for tutorials, educational sessions for clergy on these matters. That's a good question. I'll pass along the suggestion to the diocese. I guess it would be in their domain because there are practical things about purchasing and so on that'd be worthwhile them bearing in mind. Just to finish with a sincere thank you to Tanya, Bishop John, Reverend Eli and Canon Greg for the time and effort you put into planning, preparing and presenting today. Great session. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Other than that, blessings to all and see you next week. God love. Bye-bye.